We would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. Please join me for a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I'm connecting today from North Bay and would like to recognize the land that North Bay is in, the territory of the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. And the land on which we gather is the Anishinaabe people, and specifically the Nipissing First Nation. I encourage and invite you to recognize whose land that you are joining us from, and let us know in the chat. To find out more about the land on which you reside, please visit native-land.ca. Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's live session. My name is Chris Bird, and I'm joined by my colleague, Rob Boulay. We're learning systems technologists in the Teaching Hub and are very glad to have you with us today.
Recently, we had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Parr to discuss today's topic of designing for care. As a result from that conversation, we're really excited for today's talk. Her ideas and perspectives really do seem to nurture a caring learning space. Without further ado, we'll pass over the control to our moderators for today, Dr. Sarah Dreesens and Heather Carroll.
Thanks, Rob and Chris. So welcome to everyone. Very excited to be here and having a conversation with Michelann about designing for care. Currently, Heather, my co-host, is unavailable to join us right now. She might join us later, but just sending her regrets in case she doesn't make the talk. So without further ado, I'm happy and so thrilled and honored to introduce Michelann Parr, who is a professor in the Schulich School of Education at Nipissing University. She currently teaches in the PhD program. Her primary research interests include narrative forms of inquiry, identity as life work, sustainability as relationship with self, other, and all of creation, and family engagement through community partnerships. And Michelann is also my former PhD supervisor, so I'm just so honored to have this conversation with you today, Michelann. So welcome and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a really busy weekend trying to prep the conversation and to set it up in a way that models and demonstrates care as well as talking about care. So I would like to begin within that spirit with a way that I consistently fold self-care into the courses that I teach, regardless of whether I'm teaching at the elementary level or whether I'm teaching at the PhD level. So I'm going to open with I Am Human, a book of empathy. I was born a miracle, 1 in a million. I'm human. I'm always learning. I'm finding my way and choosing my path on this incredible journey. I have big dreams. I see possibility. I have endless curiosity. I make discoveries. I have a feeling of wonder. I am amazed by nature. I have a playful side. I find joy in friendships. I am human. But being human means I'm not perfect and I make mistakes. I can hurt others with my words, my actions, and even my silence. I can be hurt too. I can be fearful of things I don't yet understand and timid to try something new. I have a heavy heart when I feel sadness. I'm human. But I remind myself that because I am human, I can make choices. I can move forward. A poor choice can become a better choice with thoughtfulness. A bad day can become a great day with kindness. I can act with compassion and lend a helping hand. I can treat others equitably and be fair. I can choose not to fight, but instead to listen and find common ground. I can say I'm sorry and ask for forgiveness. I am human, one of billions, but unique. I am not alone. I am connected to my friends, to my family, to the world. We are all humans together. And I will keep trying to be the best version of me. I am full of hope. I am human. So care to me is about recognizing that we are all human, that we all make mistakes, that we are all on a path to being the very best version that we can be, whether that's in the classroom with students, whether that's in our lives with our loved ones and our friends, whether it's on the land and the way that we care for the land and all of creation. I think we can bring this into the classroom, but we need to understand what it is. And I suppose in a sense, we need to understand what it's not.
So for you, I love that book first and foremost. I have it on my bookshelf. I think it really has drives home a great message for, as you said, a variety of folks. So when talking about this idea of I am human, I can have my humanness show and shine through in my courses. Keeping that sort of perspective in mind, how then does one, or what does it mean to design with care in mind?
So I think we have to make a decision as to what it is we envision as care, what care looks and sounds like to us. So over many, many years, I've been in the classroom since 1992, I guess. It was slightly after my son was born. And I started at the kindergarten level and I worked my way all the way up to post-secondary. And now I work in the community as well. And we have a lot of these conversations about care and what it looks and sounds like. And one of the things that I have learned is that it is a very personalized view. And that when we're talking care, we're talking about how we make people feel. It's not just about what we do. It's not just about what we say. It's how we say, how we do, and what our intent is. Do we treat people with equity? Do we treat them with fairness? Do we recognize that what is fair is not always equal? Do we listen? Do we really lean in? Do we look for the humanity in people? Do we look for their strengths instead of looking at their needs? So I want to just take a minute here before we jump any further into this and just have you pause and think through what it means to feel cared for or to feel cared with, and how you could bring that into the classroom. or into any type of educational space, because we're not just talking about the formal spaces of our classrooms. When we talk about design with care, we're talking about our learning spaces. We're talking about the offices in our formal educational institutions. When I'm talking in the community, I'm also talking about the way that we set up those spaces for families. You know, are they dark and dingy, or are they bright? Do we have places to sit? Do we have areas for children to play if families are coming in? You know, are we meeting them in that space where they are? So just a quick moment to think about what care looks, sounds, and feels like for you as a human being.
And just as folks are sort of reflecting, the other piece that I think of, and I have 2 young daughters, so I'm always, I feel like my house has to be a caring space, right? Because I'm always in that nurturing mode. But just when you're talking about, is it dingy or is it bright? Are there spaces where I feel invited to come in and sit? It's like, do I belong here, right? Do I see myself here? Do I feel valued and important here? Like I can be successful here. And so I think those are maybe other pieces of sort of this conceptualization of care that I hope other folks are trying to layer into their pedagogical practices.
Right. And we'll work our way through that a little bit as we work our way through the conversation. So just moving on from here, I didn't come to this on my own. I've had lots and lots of helpers along the way, probably my greatest helpers being the students that I have worked with over the years. And I will be honest, that poem, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, as a teacher, as an educator who cares, a lot of what I learned about being that educator who cares and being that educator who meets children and adults and learners where they are, I did learn in a kindergarten classroom, but I learned it as an educator in a kindergarten classroom. And when you really listen, people will tell you what they need. How can I help? We need to ask that. How can I help? That doesn't mean we're hand-holding. It doesn't mean that we are enabling. We are legitimately asking, how can I help you to be the very best learner that you can be? So I learned this in a kindergarten classroom. I've learned it in my faculty of ed classrooms. I learned a lot through movies and through books. So just as a couple of thoughts, if you haven't seen these movies, Dead Poets Society reminds us to keep it real, keep it contemporary, keep it energetic, be willing to deviate from convention. Mona Lisa's Smile, you don't have to like it, but you have to consider it. You know, you may not like what I have to say today, and that's all fine, but please consider it. Consider what it brings to the education process, to design, honestly, to live with care in mind. Dangerous minds, look beyond the obvious, suspend judgment. Freedom riders, students need to belong and know that they matter. On a very fundamental level, if that is all we teach, all we educate, belonging and you matter, then we have done more than enough for some of our students. Breakfast Club, no student is a lost cause. Students make mistakes, educators make mistakes, and we have an obligation to make things right. And sometimes making things right is simply saying, I'm sorry. And I learned that lesson in a faculty of ed. I made a statement that to me was very much rooted in my reality at the time, without realizing how it was going to impact the students sitting in my classroom. And it wasn't until they came to me that I had to apologize and I had to say, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intent. My intent was to contextualize, and I am so very sorry for offending. That's care. We make mistakes too. We are human. We are not perfect. Aquila and the Bee, support and hard work breeds success. School of Rock, although unconventional, and originally he started out as doing it for himself, in the end, find learners' strengths and passions. Deviate from convention. Pay it forward. Be the change. This isn't easy. You'll have these conversations. Some people are going to say, really? Come on, we're just a post-secondary institution. I am supposed to deliver this content. Yep, we are bound by Council of Ontario University expectations. If we're teaching in the elementary panel, we're bound by standardized curriculum. Sure, we have to work with the content, but we can work with the content with care. We can anticipate our students' needs. We can ask what they need from us. And Wonder, the movie Wonder, such a beautiful movie. Learn with your students, care with your students, not just about students. And honestly, I want to be these teachers. I want to embody all of these lessons when I go into a classroom. But this has been a mountain to climb, and it doesn't happen overnight. You pick one thing at a time and you work your way all the way up. And we recognize that how we teach becomes just as important as what we teach, if not more than what we teach. So the how is what's going to be remembered by our learners. Not always the content, but the how. And if we want to see care, if we want to care with our students, then we need to model it in the practices that we bring into the classroom. So on a more practical level, there's loads of authors and research out there who have such wisdom to offer us. Parker Palmer reminds us that care, education is intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. Richard Wagamese, we are one energy, one song, one drum. We need to walk this together. We can look at Batista, Tanica, who tell us that how we teach is more important than what we teach. Noddings and Frere, care is practice and commitment. And practice makes practice. We have to practice care. It's not just going to happen. And it's a whole lot like learning to walk, a baby learning to walk. We start small, we fall, we stumble. We pick ourselves up, we try again, we bonk our head, we fall, we stumble, and we keep getting up and we keep going. And self-care in there says, it's okay to fall and stumble as long as you get back up again. We're not perfect. We're not expected to be perfect. We are human, and we need to accept that we are human. Do we? Some of our experiences are educative and miseducative. We learn from the good as well as learning from the bad. Brené Brown, be brave. Stand in the wilderness when you're with your students. Dare to be you. Dare to bring the best version of you into the classroom. And Dweck and Frankel, the importance of mindset. If we can't change our circumstances, and we can't. I'm going into a setting in the fall where I'm going to have 100 students in an online setting. I can't change the 100 students in there, but I can change myself and my mindset, and I can go into it positively and looking ahead and saying, I can do this. I can bring this level of care into an online virtual environment with 100 students.
And I love the idea of the beginner's mindset, right? And I think, and you have loads of experience and have been teaching for a long time. And yet you're going into a new experience. And I know you've taught online before, right? But have you ever taught 100 students online? So it's going to be a new experience for you. So I just love that leaning into, this unknown, this uncharted territory, but you're up for that challenge, that you can still layer in these pieces of care that are so fundamental, right, for your students' success. And the other piece, so I love Brené Brown, and I think you introduced me to Brené Brown during my during the PhD program. The other one I love is The Gifts of Imperfection, right? And so she really drives home this point that we aren't perfect, and that's okay. And I love your analogy of, a baby learning to walk, because that's very relevant to my life and having a 16-month-old. And yes, she picks herself back up, even though she has that tumble and she hits her head and she's scared, but knowing that she's in a caring environment, she continues to take those risks. And so I think that those pieces are really critical, and thank you for sharing those incredible resources. So in thinking about then with designing for care in mind, why is it important? What impact do you see or do you feel? Because a lot of it is right feeling that a pedagogy of care will have on learners in the post-secondary environment.
I think our goal is success for our students. And, you know, without overgeneralizing, we live in a culture where there's a lot of anxiety out there, and especially within the context of COVID. And so, you know, many of our students are coming and they're away from home, and some of their foundational support networks are gone from them. And what they're really seeking is to be safe, to feel like they belong, to feel like they can take risks. And that's what learning is. It's about taking risks. We know that we learn on the edge of our comfort zones. And I think when we care for our students, we help them to dance on the edge of their comfort zones instead of feeling like they're going to fall over the cliff. And it's not a practice where we have to make ourselves available to our students 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, over and over again. You know, just like any type of relationship, we set boundaries, we let them know when we're going to be available, you know, on a fundamental level, setting up office hours and being available by email is demonstrating care for our students. But now we want to take it that one step beyond. And we know that it has an impact on student success. We know that students who are more comfortable, who feel like they belong in a classroom, who can see themselves in the curriculum, are better positioned to learn. Slide 4, folks. You know, often we have that question of, but you're asking me to do more. You know, caring means that I have to do more for my students. And it sounds like a whole lot of work, you know. And I think what we're trying to advocate here is that caring supports students. It helps to teach them risk and resiliency. It helps to teach them how to deal with struggle and failure in the classroom. We've spent a long time feeling that failure is a bad thing in our programs. And yet, if we go back to the analogy of how a baby learns to walk, they fail over and over and over again. And yet they keep getting up and trying again. You know, so we're not asking to do differently. We're not asking to do more. We're asking to do differently. So things like have a beginner's mindset, go back, read, look at movies from a different perspective, enter into this courageous relationship with students. And that's not meaning that it's going to be a personal relationship. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to ask every single student, what do you need? How can I help? It means that we're anticipating in advance. We're looking at our students and we're saying, okay, you know, structure works for all students. We can be consistent. We can be predictable. We can tell them what we're going to do. And in doing those types of things, we free the students to do the real learning. When I was teaching in a kindergarten program, I had a principal say to me, "You are the most structured kindergarten teacher I have ever met." And I was legitimately offended. And I sat with it for about 24, 48 hours after my evaluation, thinking, I don't want her to write that into my evaluation. It's offensive. So I went back to that principal and I said, okay, what do you mean? And she said, I walk into your classroom and she said, every single student knows exactly what they need to do. You have your agenda on the board. Everything is color coded. They know where to get their math books. They know where to get their journals. They know what the rules are at the computers. They know how to hang their coats. They know when to open their books. They know that there's a message of the day up on the board or a word of the day. I now bring that all in to my classrooms. because I've recognized that those are not just structures for kindergarten students. Those are structures all the way through. And when we plan that way, we free our students to do the real learning. And the real learning is seeing themselves in the curriculum, helping them to connect, freeing them to make those deeper level connections and make sense. When planning is huge. Will it take time? Will it take more time the first time around? Probably. It will. But it's a mindset. It's a philosophy. It's not just a bunch of things that we can tick off and say, done, 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 done. I did that in my first couple of years of teaching. I thought, okay, I've covered it all. I've got all the inclusive programming happening. But there were still some of my students who didn't feel cared for. So I still had to think my way through that. What's the impact of welcoming students at the door instead of standing at the front of the room? Because when we stand at the front of the room, we're saying, I'm the expert and I'm waiting for you to sit down so I can share my knowledge. Whereas when we stand at the door and all of our opportunities are structured and we welcome, we're saying to students, you belong here. And I'm so happy that you're here today. Sense of belonging and community, being part of the community, making sure that you have loads of opportunity for conversation, loads of opportunity for educational play in the classroom. And that recognition, back to the book I opened with, we are all in this together. We are unique, but one of billions. Being human and doing you, starting where you are, adopting a very Vygotskian approach where you can maybe find a more knowledgeable other, somebody who's done some of what you want to try before, and maybe they can help you through the process, and you develop that caring relationship with them, because care is relational. It's not just something that I can do for students. I can design for care, but ultimately at the end of the day, when I design for care, I'm designing to care with students, because I need them to care about the curriculum. I need them to care about each other. I need them to care about their learning space. I need them to care about engagement and student success. So sure, it's going to take more time up front, but once we negotiate that concept of care, and that begins with us, and I'll talk a little bit about self-care later, but understanding what care is begins with understanding what it means for ourselves and how we care for ourselves.
And I think the other piece too, I mean, so many amazing things layered into that, you know, what does it mean to do differently? I think we also need to consider the online space, and that caring still needs to be in our online courses, whether, you know, asynchronous or synchronous. And you're right, it takes a lot of front loading the first time or the first few times, but I think the more you can build these lenses into your planning, into your design, and then into actually how you're teaching, it sort of will become second nature, right? And I love this idea of structure. I thrive in a structured environment personally as a student. And I think a lot of students that I've learned alongside in both a student and an educator role really do thrive in that structured environment. And so in the online realm, it can be as simple as, here's a weekly email that tells you this is your to-do list, right? Or these are the expectations. It's removing that guesswork. You know, right. What should I be doing, or where should I be at in this learning journey? Because when I agree with you, when you remove that guesswork, that's when they can focus on the learning, right? And they can focus on really digging their heels into the content. The other piece is the welcoming piece. I love, I mean, Freire, as you know, is huge in my own pedagogy and you know, who I am as an educator, who I am as a researcher, who I am as a mother, and this idea of power, and how do I shift these power differences and share power with my students, and I think a lot of people I've had conversations with, it's not about you giving up power in that sense, right? It's not about I don't have any power. It's we all have power. And how do we create an environment, a learning environment where we all have power? Which is kind of an interesting paradigm shift, I think, for some folks to make. And just that's sort of where my mind was going when you were talking about, the idea of power in courses. And yeah, the other piece is use the tech, like for your online environment, right? Use the tech to create that welcoming environment, and as much as you can, have a voice and a face to the things that you're doing. And yeah, I mean, all of those pieces are going to lead to student success. I wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
And I think that, when we're talking about tech, we're living in a technological world now. So, absolutely we need to use the tech in our online environments, but we also need to use them in our face-to-face environments, because we often resist, as educators, particularly at the university level, we resist things like putting our resources and our agendas up online. And I have heard chat that, oh, you're just hand holding, you're babying them, you're taking their not their ownership, but you're taking their work away from them by putting all of this into a Google Doc or into a Google Drive for them. And I suppose I'm looking at my 100 students in the fall and I'm thinking, how do I want them to spend their time? Do I want them to spend half their time looking for the resources? Or do I want for them to be able to find the resources and to make sense of the resources? And so I think these are some of the questions that I have often heard, how do I begin? And so one of the things, I started teaching in the PhD program about 8 years ago, and I started with a very detailed course syllabus. And after my first year of working in that course, I took a step back and I thought, wow, we crammed a whole lot of content into those 12 days. What did the students really learn? And so I took a step back and I started to interrogate my syllabus, and I went through it line by line. Would I want to be a student in this class? What am I saying in the words I choose? I even went back through my syllabus this year, and instead of citing the university policy on academic integrity as it is, I flipped it and I said, I am committed to academic integrity. And here's what I'm willing to do to support you. So, I'm not going to read through this entire slide, but I think what we're doing is, we're looking at it again through a beginner's mindset, even through a learner's mindset. Would I want to be a student in this course? How would I feel if I were sitting in this course? Is there something for me in this syllabus? Or does it look like it's going to be a whole lot of content that I need to acquire? So my mindset matters. And the more that my mindset matters as an educator, and the more I decide what I ultimately want to achieve at the end of the day, the better positioned I am to accomplish this. And so I want to just throw a quick video up. I think it's about 2.5 minutes long, from Freedom Writers, because this is the goal. This is what this teacher ultimately wanted. And so we need to then think about, how did she get there? How did she arrive at the end of the year whereby her students felt that her space was home?
Nobody ever listens to a teenager. Everybody thinks you should be happy just because you're young. And they don't see the wars that we fight every single day. And one day my war will end, and I will not die. And I will not tolerate abuse from anyone. I am strong.
My mom's kicked me out when I got jumped into the gang life. but I like her to see me graduate. I like to be 18.
Miss G, can I read something from my diary?
That'd be great.
Who is he?
Man, he's been with us since freshman year, fool.
What's his name?
I don't know.
The summer was the worst summer in my short 14 years of life. It all started with a phone call. My mother was crying and begging, asking for more time, as if she were gasping for her last breath of air. She held me as tight as she could and cried. Her tears hit my shirt like bullets and told me we were being evicted. She kept apologizing to me. I thought I have no home. I should have asked for something less expensive at Christmas. On the morning of the eviction, a hard knock on the door woke me up. The sheriff was there to do his job. I looked up at the sky, waiting for something to happen. My mother has no family to lean on, no money coming in. Why bother coming to school or getting good grades if I'm homeless? The bus stops in front of the school. I feel like throwing up. I'm wearing clothes from last year, some old shoes, and no new haircut. I kept thinking I'd get laughed at. Instead, I'm greeted by a couple of friends who were in my English class last year. And it hits me. Mrs. Gurwal, my crazy English teacher from last year, is the only person that made me think of hope. Talking with friends about last year's English and our trips, I began to feel better. I received my schedule, and the first teacher is Mrs. Gurwal in room 203. I walk into the room and feel as though all the problems in life are not so important anymore. I am home.
So this is one of my favorite clips of all time from Freedom Writers. And it's always my goal. That's the level of community. That's the sense of home. That's the sense of commitment that I want for my students to feel when they're in my educational space. And that's, again, it doesn't matter whether it's a kindergarten classroom or a community space or a university space. But I'd be lying to say that it's easy or that it doesn't take time to think, to really think through. So there are lots of different strategies, different theories at play that we can work with that help us to embed care in our course design so that students genuinely see themselves in our in our hidden curriculum. We have content, which is our curriculum, but the hidden curriculum, the one that we sometimes don't talk about, is the care piece. It's the respect for learners and who they are in the classroom. So next, that's perfect. So how do I embed care? And these are, I've pulled out 5 or 6 of my favorite strategies if you want. The theories that have been part of me since I entered into formal education, but they are also the theories that I've grown up with. I've either grown up with them with my grandparents. So down in the bottom corner is Camburn's Conditions of Learning. If we think about, again, how a child learns to walk and to talk, they go through engagement and response and approximation. We cheer them on. The way that a child learns to talk, when they call for a bottle as a newborn, they cry to tell you that they're hungry. And then they start to reach for the bottle. And then they move from reaching from the bottle to saying Baba. And then they will maybe add in a baba please, or they will add in a verb, but they don't go from that cry all the way up to, can I have a drink, please? They don't. And all the way through, we reward approximation and we cheer them on. How can we bring that sense of approximation, of feedback, of recognition, that students are doing the best that they can, and that it's our job to move them along that continuum? Is it maybe that we can plan in a draft work, or working with them on a Google Doc where we can teach them to learn through writing? Instead of teaching them about writing, maybe we can teach them to write by writing with them, by showing them and modeling, and adopting a we do, you do, we do, I do, we do, you do philosophy. So back to that prior slide, please. We also have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that unless our very basic needs of, physiological and safety needs are met, then we're going to be hard pressed to learn. And so that, we know that many of our students come to us with mental health struggles, and they're away from home for the first time. And so how do we accept those students into our classroom? How do we support them as they're learning not just to be an undergraduate student in our programs, but they're also learning to be independent on their own for the very first time? We have some great residence programs that are doing that, but we also have to recognize that we need to bring Maslow into our classroom. I do a mental check every time I'm planning. So Gardner's multiple intelligences and or learning styles, however you want to frame it. But do I have something in my program that is going to appeal to the interpersonal learners, to the ones who need to learn on their own, for the ones who learn through music, for the ones who learn through video, for the ones who need an experience? I also ask, when can I take it outside? And that doesn't mean I'm going to go outside and learn about the outdoors. It means that I'm going to appeal to my naturalist learners. And if I can take a conversation outside, then I'm going to do so. And even if that's just a walk through the forest, or sitting on the grass behind the university, or sitting on the grass in a schoolyard, can I take it outdoors? And what are the benefits of taking it outdoors? Well, it makes our worlds a little bit bigger. And then I'm ever guided by the 7 grandfather teachings. And is what I'm doing, am I acting with wisdom, with truth, with integrity, honesty, bravery, courage, humility, and love? And to me, care is enacting all of those at once. And then I'm also asking myself, is this sustainable? Am I teaching students to care for themselves, to care for others, to care for all of creation? Am I inspiring them to be the very best version of themselves that they can possibly be? So these are my philosophical underpinnings. And I'm a big believer that I never ask students to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And one of the things that we do at length in our PhD program, and one of the things I'm hoping to build in to my course in the fall, is helping students to understand the ground that they're standing on. What do they bring to this experience? What are their beliefs and their values that they carry with them into the classroom? Because this very much shapes who they are as a learner. And I need to care about that emotional side in order to care about their intellectual, and in also to care about their spiritual. And I recognize that what's fair isn't always equal, but that what's good for many students is good for all students. And that what is fair is when we get what we need to succeed. So these are the philosophical underpinnings, but there are lots of other concrete things that we can bring into the classroom as well.
It's so much good stuff. I don't even know where to sort of jump in at, but I think the one big piece, and you touch on it in the slides, is that we do need to use this trauma-informed lens, especially during COVID, right? And we've had an earlier training talk around trauma-informed pedagogy. But I think the connecting back to the Freedom Writers, which is a beautiful film, which you introduced me to, by the way, is that you never know what students are going through, right? And so that student is sharing their experiences with being evicted. How do we ever know those nuanced experiences that our students are going through, especially online? And so I think that bringing that caring lens into our design process is, the question is, why wouldn't you do it? Right? Why wouldn't you, as an educator, as someone who wants students to thrive and to succeed? And I love all of the philosophical underpinnings that you've just shared, and I share a lot of them, thankfully, because of you. And I think the other piece too is that one thing that I sort of seeing layered into all of those pieces is that you're not designing for how you learn best as the educator.
No.
And I think that a lot of maybe not a lot, but some do design their courses in a way that suits them, either out of convenience because they have so much else going on. It sort of just needs to be this way so that, you know, I'm not burning the candle at both ends, right? But also, if you don't have sort of this sense of multiple intelligences, you're probably going to lean to a design that does suit your learning style best. And so thank you for bringing those more philosophical pieces so that folks can, you know, do a little bit more self-study around some of the different layers that they can bring into their course. So thinking then, because I know we're getting close to the end of our time, I think the big piece is, how do we ensure that we aren't burning the candle at both ends, right? How do we balance self-care in relation to design, in relation to teaching, balancing content with care? How do we do it all and not burn ourselves out so quickly in the process?
So if we flip, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on the next couple of slides because they're just a showing. And so planning, going back to the very beginning, planning this conversation with care, all of these slides will be posted for your reference. Prior slide, please. Burning the candle at both ends it's a real danger. Because this looks and sounds like it's a lot of work, but there are some simple things that we can do to get ourselves started. So we can care by being open to a living, breathing syllabus, by posting our syllabus up on Google Docs. And this first picture here is just a snapshot of what we did in our summer course. And doing it this way meant that I could answer the questions once on the syllabus. And every single time I answered a question, all of the students were emailed with that question and with that answer. And so I'm not answering 20, 30 email a day about something that wasn't clear on my syllabus. It also then helps me to be self-reflective because I'm thinking, okay, if that question is there, how can I make the syllabus even more clear for next time? I can say to students, what do you need? How can I help? And ask them and invite them to tell me exactly how I can help them. I asked my students, next slide, please, at the beginning of this year, what are your hopes and dreams? And I asked them to put them all into a single Google Doc that I then read. And I went through the very first day of class and I answered every single one of those to show them, this is where we're going to get to this at this point in the course. This is where we'll get to this. I didn't say specifically, but I alleviated their maybe fears right up front and I set them up. And if there was something that they wanted that wasn't in my syllabus, then I went back and I tried to determine, okay, where can I put this into my syllabus so that I'm being responsive to my students and formally responsive, not just responsive on the fly. I put all my course resources up in a Google Doc for them. And I put them up in advance of the course. So all their readings are in a folder for them. But then on a daily basis, I have an agenda. I'm an over planner. I'm way over planned with this conversation today. But what I have learned to do is to let my students level up so that if I did not accomplish everything that I set out to accomplish in my day, then I post everything with a challenge to do it on your own. I would say 50, 60% of my students leveled up all the way through the PhD program because they feared missing out. They wanted to know, what didn't we get to? We were busy in our classes, caring and listening and leaning into conversation and meandering where it needed to go. And there were days when that meant that what I had planned didn't seem quite so important anymore. And so the self-care piece here was being willing to say, I'm not the sage on the stage here. I don't have all of the knowledge, and I need to let myself off the hook, and I need to share this process with my students. So sharing resources, anticipating that they're going to need certain things. Again, never asking them to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. We journaled every day, and I journaled with them. I kept my own journal, and then I journaled with them in their journals, because that notion of doing with students, that notion of asking yourself the question, would I want to be a student in this class, is so very important. So I think that brings us to actually the very last slide. What does it look, sound, feel like in practice? It looks a whole lot like listening to your students, like recognizing them as human beings, like keeping up with the different assessment strategies and teaching learning strategies of the day. Having watched my grandkids do online school, I started to question, okay, so what would I want to be doing? And what were the things that they were doing that I would like? So in the fall, I'm looking and I'm thinking about, how am I going to negotiate choice with learners? Can I use Flipgrid to orally get them to present instead of always having it be in writing? Can they do a video or a podcast, a blog, a website? Can we use photo voice? Can there be weekly engagement quizzes that show me that they have actually attended class? You know, and here I'm thinking back to my structure. I will have a read aloud every single day. I will have a writing piece every single day. I will have a word of the day. I will have a guest speaker, whether it's a live guest speaker or whether it's a TED Talk guest speaker. But I can quiz my students at the end of the day and I can say, okay, who was the guest speaker? What was the book we read? What was your key learning for each of those things? And I can very quickly come up with an engagement quiz that Google Forms is going to mark for me, which then frees me up to do the real work with students, which is looking at how they're making sense, how they're engaging, what meaning are they taking. So on the far right, and I know it's really blurry, but in the PhD course this summer, we used Richard Wagamese's One Drum to kick off our self-care conversations. And this is the quotation quilt that the students co-constructed at the end of the class that is now going to be printed and sent out to students. We began the course with a self-care pack where they each received a book and a survival pack and a self-care challenge. Now I'm looking at, how am I going to transfer that particular practice into an online setting where I can't send 100 students a concrete package in the mail, but I have some great ideas because I know that I can do this virtually. I know that I can set up a virtual survival kit for them. But in all of this, it always is going to bring me back to that question, Sarah. And it's a really important question. How do I take care of myself? Because when I start doing this, it's really exciting. And I love it. And I can never turn my mind off. And I keep thinking and thinking. I just finished one course and here I am jumping into another course and I don't want to let it go. But I know that if I don't take that self-care time, I'm in trouble. So for me, I go to my yoga mat, and on my yoga mat, I leave it all behind. My mind is clear, my body is engaged, and I'm fully present in that moment. So I think if I can give the biggest piece of advice of how you don't burn the candle at both ends, It's that you're really fully present. Oh, go back to the other one. You're really fully present in everything that you do, whether that's with your kids, whether it's with your students. So my grandkids now know now, and actually my phone got confiscated last week on the golf course because I was checking my email for my students. And my grandson knows that my commitment is when I'm with him, I am with him. And that means I'm not checking my phone and I'm taking 2 hours to be with him. So he took my phone, which was fun, you know, because he held me to my notion of self-care, which is I have to be fully present in that moment. I know I teach who I am. And I know at the end of the day, and now looking at my core values, that all of what I bring into a classroom is what I would hope to bring to experience in a classroom. And I have experienced this in graduate courses when I was at McGill. So I approach this now with that notion of radical hope. My self-care is with radical hope. How I treat myself is how I'm going to care for others. But we do have to be careful because compassion fatigue is alive and well. And as educators, sometimes we don't know where to draw the line. And then if you enter into the university system where we live with this publish or perish, it's a scary thing. And we forget that we need to take time for ourselves. So, you know, I now ask, how can I allow myself the luxury of slowing down and leaning into my passion? How do I plan time in my program, in my class for self-care? Which is why I always have a read aloud, which is why I always have a guest speaker, which is why I want to make sure that there's something in there for me, which is why I'm always looking for opportunities to take it outdoors, whether it's a game of follow the leader or that's the boat going out. Follow the leader, think, pair, share, and just swapping up the think, pair, shares on a trail instead of doing it sitting around a table in the classroom. So caring for self looks a whole lot like making sure that my mind, my body, my physical soul is well, that I'm mindful of myself and others, that I start where I am. I started where I was many, many years ago. And that notion of don't ask your students to do something that you wouldn't do yourself, I learned with a 5-year-old in a kindergarten classroom on the last day of school. I think I inherently knew it, but she made me remember it because I had snakes in my classroom. My family is a snake family, and my children assured me that they would take care of the snakes in my classroom, but that it was a really good fear to help kids get accustomed to fear. And so this little one at the end of the day, knowing full well that in my 40-some years I had never held a snake, came and said, "So, Madame, if you hold it, I'll hold it with you." And I had no choice. So build your self-care into what you do in the classroom and set an intention for each day, you know, for the week, for the year. This is the year that I'm going to start caring in my classroom, and this is what it's going to look and sound like. And when you bring it into your classroom, be explicit. Tell the students what you're doing and why you're doing it, and let them care with you. Because when we care, we're building not just care of self and other and all of creation, but now we're showing them how to care about the content that we're teaching. And that's where we get to blend and balance content with self-care in the classroom, because we show that we care enough about the really important things. We don't just cram content or load content on top of content. I'm guilty. I have done that. The first year that I taught the PhD course, the course readings, I think, Sarah, that was your group, they were 2 inches thick. Now we've pared them back. We've done the work of curating the most critical reads. That doesn't mean that all the reads aren't there. They are. They're in an alternative or optional folder. But the 2 or 3 critical readings are now culled for students. Express gratitude. We are so very privileged to learn and to teach and to work with learners of all sorts. That's just something to be cherished. Lots of other ideas I think we'll finish with find your people, they get you, and be you, do you. And if you are doing you in the classroom with genuine care for yourself and for others, your students are going to get you.
I couldn't agree more. And yes, you teach who you are. And as your former student and someone who worked closely with you, your caring approach 100% has a significant impact on your students. And I look back on my time in the PhD program, the fact that you wrote alongside us in our journals, right? The fact that you brought read alouds to us and we felt safe and we could have these really deep conversations about self and identity and who we are, and this sense of being and becoming really took shape because of the caring environment. And I love this idea of being responsive and being flexible, right? Sharing of yourself, I think is something that we become very uncomfortable with, not being seen as an expert. And we have been conditioned, I think, in our society that this sense of failure, the fear of failure is real. And I can see that in my 2.5-year-old, right? And so I bring that lens, and I thank you for sharing all of these really incredible practical strategies, because I think we do need to move away from it's hand holding, right? They're adults. They
Right.
can figure it out. It's paring it back to that they are human and they need a relationship. They need connection. And as someone that they're going to spend a lot of time with, I think that we owe it to them and to ourselves and to the practice of being an educator to be caring and to be relational and to share and to negotiate, right? And to be present. That's something that I struggle with too. And sharing where you are, who you are, your hopes and your dreams. I saw that on your that final slide, right? Is to dream, but to have students share their dreams and their hopes and what do they want to get out of this course, I think is something that will really drive them to success. So I think we're at time. Oh, 2 minutes over. I could continue talking with you probably for hours and hours about this, but I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being such a caring educator. You have had a significant impact on me as a researcher, as an educator, even as a mother. And you may not really know that you have that significant impact, but you certainly have. And I just am so honored to have had this conversation and shared this space with you. And thank you for all of the wisdom and the gifts that you've given us to think about and to digest and to bring into our own practice.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to anyone who chimed in, who's watching, who's viewing live or at a later date. We are very grateful for all of the work that the Faculty of Ed does at Nipissing. And again, thanks, Michelann, for your time today.
No problem.